Hi, and welcome to this modelling test masterclass. I'm your host, Lucy Gordon. The session you're about to watch was recorded live, so I do apologise in advance for any glitches, but you do have the benefit of having all of the questions that the attendees asked included in this video. I really hope you find it useful, and if you want more support from me and from Excel and Property going forward, then I do invite you to join the EIP. The EIP Academy is an online training portal full of videos teaching you how to build financial models from scratch. Below this video, you'll find a link to explore the EIP Academy in more detail. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us at hello@excelandproperty.com. I really look forward to supporting you in your real estate journey, and I really hope you enjoy this masterclass. Welcome everyone to this session about modelling tests. Just to sort of kick us off and see where we are at the moment, I'd love to know why you are here today. Are you actively job hunting, or are you thinking about job hunting, or are you just looking to upskill and learn a little bit more in today's session? Okay, lovely. We've got a couple of people who are, well, quite a few people who are actively job hunting, and then a couple in the other boxes as well. So that's nice and interesting. So hopefully you'll find, those of you who are, well, all of these boxes, you should find today's session quite helpful, hopefully. Trying to do two screens at once. I then have just another little question for those of you who are in the job hunting space, just to find out sort of what stage of the process you're in, whether you are applying to lots of jobs and just not getting through to the interview stage, or whether you're getting through but not passing the modelling tests, or you've been offered a job and you're not quite sure why you're here. Okay, so people more at that beginning bit, trying to get through to the interview stage, trying to get through to the modelling test stage, which is good. So you should all find this session really, really useful, which is fantastic. Before we get going, just for those of you who don't know who I am and who Excel and Property is, Excel and Property, or EIP as it's shortened down to, is primarily a training facility, but we do consulting as well. Over the last 6 years of running Excel and Property, we've modelled over £3 billion worth of assets. I've had 260 learners trained since last May, when we launched this EIP Academy. All of the projects that I've worked on to date have basically covered every sector you could think of. So residential, commercial, operational, work with private equity, work with banks, all sorts of people, basically, building them bespoke models, helping them with hiring analysts and helping them with training analysts. And through the EIP Academy, we donate 2% of that revenue to UK charities, and you can see some of the charities on our website that we've donated to. And I'm also a trainer and author for the RICS on discounted cash flows. So that is me and Excel and Property in a nutshell. In today's session, we are going to cover quite a few different things. So I'm going to ask you to, if you have questions, feel free to pop them into the Q&A chat bit, and I will answer them at the end. Equally, I will leave a little bit of a space once we've sort of done the nitty-gritty elements of this, to answer any questions that you guys might have. So, first of all, why are modelling skills important? Hopefully, by joining this session, you already know that they are important. But to give you a couple of examples, all of these are screenshots from messages people have sent me or people hiring on LinkedIn, and you can see they all talk about modeling skills, analytical skills, strong financial skills. There are still jobs specifically separated out into analysts and other roles, but more and more and more companies are wanting those people who are doing the other roles to also be able to do analysis themselves. So it's a core skill that you will be tested on for quite a few roles because lots of companies want you to have this skill. You might not necessarily end up doing a lot of model building and analysis going forward, but you need to be able to understand how to read a model, how to be able to assess the metrics and understand how it's, how they all interplay against each other. So it is a really, really important skill. So why are financial models so important in real estate? So financial models let you test scenarios before you're making a commitment. Real estate is very time intensive. You don't just, it's very slow moving. You can't just, well, some people can, but see a property and buy it. That's, that same minute. But in reality, that's not what happens. You have to go through a whole process of raising capital, having an offer accepted, managing that asset before you sell it, and gaining income, gaining a profit from it through capital return. So it's a very long process and it's slow moving, it's very capital intensive and full of risks. So these sort of decisions take months and years before you see any kind of results. And so the financial model lets you test those scenarios before you make a commitment. So things like, should you actually buy the asset? Is it something that is going to return a profit? Are you going to, make money rather than lose money, hopefully? It allows you to test scenarios, like specific scenarios and sensitivities, like what happens if the rents don't grow. You can assess how much debt you can take on or how much equity is required, whether you'll hit the return hurdles that you want. A good model is not just trying to tell you, what might happen in terms of a positive, it's also showing you what could go wrong. And that's why it's so important in real estate, so that you can look at the upsides and the downsides. So right now, I'm just going to put a poll in here just to see how do financial models make you feel right now? What sort of words are coming to mind when you're thinking about a potential financial modeling test that you're having to do, coming up soon? Yeah, nervous, deep end, yes. Yeah, lots of S's on anxious, of course. I think with with modeling tests, they are slightly designed to put you on. They are designed to put you under pressure, aren't they? So that you feel to see how you're reacting under pressure, and also, to make sure that you can model those things in that sort of timed environment. So for the person who said unsure what to expect, I will show you a specific example today of a real life modeling test. So you should be able to see what was expected of you, and hopefully feel a bit more confident going into your modeling tests. So thank you very much, everyone, for putting some words in there. It's all very helpful. So with financial models, lots of people think that financial models should predict your returns to the nearest pound, and it should be an absolutely perfect sort of forecast. But that's not actually really the point of it. The point of them is to be able to give you a rough estimate and assess the risks of the property. So you should be looking, the first thing people will be looking at when they're looking at financial model is, what are my expected returns? Because that's the sort of the easiest thing that people think they want. They want a 20% IRR, and the model will tell them when they've got a 20% IRR. But more importantly, what it's also going to show you is your cash flow. So what your equity requirements are, when you're going to have to put cash in, when you're going to get cash out of the investment. It's going to show you the volatility of it and the sensitivity against certain metrics. So, if you were to change your rent or spend a bit more capex on a property, does that completely, push it over and it stops working? That's what the financial model's there to help us do. It also shows you things like the optimal hold and allows you to assess different exit strategies. So they're not trying to give you, as I say, that return down to the nearest pound, because that's almost never going to happen from day one of actually creating a model, but it allows you to manage the process of the cash flow and manage your cash flow and your equity requirements, manage your decision making, your negotiations by having this model. So models need to tread the fine line between like having enough detail, but also being useful and usable in those sort of situations where you are trying to assess, whether a deal is worth doing. And as I say, particularly those decision making and negotiation points, they're really, really helpful for. So at Excel and Property, and in my training and in my consulting, the way that I build models, and this is how I'm going to teach you in this session so that you know how you're going to be following this through if you were doing a modeling test, is using the SMART modeling method. So what that stands for, what that means is, if you take the time to build the models properly using this method from the beginning, then you can improve the speed of and quality of your models, because you're preparing and following this strategy from the beginning. So the first step of the SMART modeling method is scope. So what that means is that we start by defining what the model actually needs to do. What are our key deliverables? What do we want in the model and what do we not want? Who are we delivering this to, and therefore what are the most important outputs that they will need to see? If we plan at the beginning before we start building the model, you'll end up saving yourself a lot of time later. The next step is modeling. So once you've got your plan for what you're going to model, you then start building it out. And the structure of your model should reflect those specific details that you've worked out in your scope, to be able to give you, using the inputs that you have, to be able to give you the outputs that you need. Once you've built a model, you should always audit it. So always make sure that you're checking it properly. Are the numbers all flowing correctly? Are all the formulas working? Does it reflect the right assumptions? Doing a little bit of sense checking to make sure it makes sense is absolutely key. And that's why I've seen a lot of people fall down in modeling tests, because the returns just don't make any sense. And it's clear to see that they haven't checked whether it makes any sense. The next stage is review. So this is slightly less of something that you would do in a modeling test, but this is where you're walking it through with your stakeholder. So in a modeling test, you would probably, instead of walking it through with your stakeholder, you want to start thinking like the stakeholder. So you want to start thinking about where there might be gaps or questions that you hadn't considered, to make sure that that model is answering, all of those questions that an investor or a client would want them to. And then the final stage is transition. So lots of people think that if they make models too easy to use, they'll be written out of a job because someone else will just be able to take it over and they're no longer required. But if you make your model easy for other people to use, then it means that you can be promoted to do other roles. You don't have to just sit there doing analysis all the time. You can then start to do other roles because you've made the transition of your model really, really helpful. So what I mean by that is clear labeling, logical layout, supporting notes and documentation. And this is also important in your modeling test, because if the assessor of the modeling test cannot understand how your model works to be able to check it, then they just won't bother marking it because they'll be like, I don't have the time. These are busy people. They do not have the time to spend 8 hours trying to work out how your model works. They want you to be able to figure it out in 10 minutes. So if you follow this methodology, you'll hopefully end up with a model that is accurate, useful, and built in sort of half the time because you're following this process as you're building it. So, sorry, I've got several computers on the go. So, model building best practice. This is a really simple version of a model. So the model that you'll be asked to do in a modeling test is likely to be more complicated than this, because this is just a very simple annual cash flow that I'm showing you here, and it's something that we use in our free crash course. So if you guys want to join that, you can find that on the homepage of our website, which goes through this stuff in a lot more detail. But effectively, modeling best practice means that we're going to split out our inputs, make them really, really clear. So you can see here in the way that I model and how lots of people in real estate model as well, you put a yellow background with blue text to make it really clear. These are what are inputs. These are the numbers that you can change. These inputs are then going to flow through into your calculations. So in this model that I'm showing you here, the calculations and the cash flow are the same. So they're calculated within the same lines. But if you have more complicated models, you'll want to split out some of these formulas so that you don't end up with, formulas that are 18 miles long. Particularly if you've got multiple tenants in there, you'll probably going to want to split out the tenant lines separately. But effectively, that goes into your calculations. And then your calculations feed out into your outputs. So again, you can see here the way that I've color coded this, using the EIP colors, of course, is to make it really, really clear for anyone else opening up this model that these are what all these bits stand for. And when I produce models for my clients, they all follow this same color scheme so that then they know, and all the models in the template library that I have and all the models in the training that I have all follow this scheme so that everyone knows where the inputs are, where the calculations are, and where the outputs are. So time to get on to a couple of real life examples. So these have been shared with me by students within the EIP Academy. So these are real modeling tests that have been set within the last sort of 6 months. They will follow different layouts. So some of them are just in Excel. They have an Excel template already set up for you, and you have to do the calculations, and they're just written out. Others are Word dumps into Word, and you can see there are assumptions and there are tables in there that have all your bits of information. And then some of the modeling tests will look a little bit sexier in a PDF with a bit looking more attractive and looking more like an investment memo that you then need to follow along with. So we're going to dive into one of these examples now. I'm not going to be doing any live modeling on this session, just to be clear, so we do not have time for that. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through a real example of a modeling test and show you the key bits that you should be looking out for, because they will all follow the same pattern basically. So I'm just going to have a glass of water. Hold on. So here is an example of a modeling test. What this is made up of is, first of all, a bit of information about the property or the opportunity that you're looking at. So this is a student piece, an asset, student accommodation, PBSA, in central London. It's got a lease with a current fixed rent. It then says that there's a separate attached investment memo which presents the deal opportunity in more detail. So that will be where you have a proper tenancy schedule, and you'll probably have details about the location, etc. So it'll be a brochure that goes along with this. The next bit in this test, and I say all of this information will be in all the tests, you just have to look out for it, are all the assumptions. So what they're asking you to do is, you've got a 3-hour test, quite a long test. You're going to produce a fully integrated Excel financial model that uses these assumptions here. You then have to produce these outputs as part of your test. So you need to produce a financial model and a client summary. You can see that financial model is going to be submitted to the assessor, and the client summary will be a PDF or a Word document that you present face-to-face to the assessor of the modelling test. And then finally, helpfully, this one here also has a bit of extra detail telling you what will be assessed as part of this modelling test. A lot of them will not necessarily have this bit in it, but basically what is written down here is what most of them are looking at. So they're looking to make sure that your model is clear, accurate, and that you've managed to find reasonable assumptions. You haven't made it overly complicated. Remember, it's a time-limited thing, so you can't make it overly complicated. And that you've justified and backed up anything that you've had to sort of source from elsewhere. The whole idea with all of the financial models is, financial modeling tests, is to assess your real estate knowledge, your financial modeling knowledge, and your deal analysis skills. But most importantly, which is what they don't write in there, is it's also assessing your ability to follow instructions rather than just doing your own thing. If people know, if people want to hire someone who is not a maverick, ideally, they want to hire someone who will get on with the job and do the tasks that they are set. So if you just go off on your own tangent and do something completely random, then even though you think you're being clever, you're not fulfilling the brief. So make sure that you prioritize fulfilling the brief over doing anything else. So now we're going to dive into this modeling test a little bit more, looking at the key bits. So this bit of what we're talking about here is what fits under the S of the SMART modeling method, the scope. We want to make sure that we're really understanding the instructions of the modeling test before we do any modeling. There's no point in starting to do modeling until you know exactly what you're trying to produce. So we've worked out what everything is in the modeling test. Now we just need to make sure that we're highlighting all the things and being aware of all of the things that we need to do. So we need to produce a financial model. We've got 3 hours to do that. So what I would recommend that you do in your 3 hours is that, or in this part of the test, so for the first 10 minutes, you plan out what you're going to do over those 3 hours. So the first 10 minutes is reading all of this, highlighting all the bits that you need, and planning out what you're going to do to make sure that you finish the test or get as close to finishing the test as possible. You also need to produce this client summary of 1 to 2 pages. So within your 3 hours, you've got the financial model and you've got the client summary to produce. Now they've put a bit of extra information here. Some modeling tests won't tell you these sort of things, but if it's in there, make sure you listen to it. So for example, this one, they want a monthly model. So not a quarterly model, not an annual model, a monthly model. They want it to be fully flexible and full linkage. Again, lots of modeling tests won't specify this, but we all want modeling tests. We all want the models that we're submitted to be flexible. Because sometimes you'll find a modeling test that's laid out in a slightly different way to this, but that, 5 questions in, it'll ask you to run a sensitivity or to change your rent. And if you've hard coded everything and not made it flexible with formulas, that's going to be a real pain in the bum. So this is why we're doing this exercise at the beginning. We're reviewing everything and making sure that we're aware that it needs to be flexible, but also that we need to have the ability to change specific assumptions. So in this one, we're wanting to change assumptions, including the ERV, the occupancy and the timing, etc. But we also then want to be able to present returns, risks, and the sensitivities. So he's repeated himself here, the person who's set this test, to specify rents, occupancy, cap rates, etc. in those sensitivities. So you need to make sure that all of that stuff is flexible when you're building the model. Then in the client summary, you need to present those key financial metrics. You need to do a SWOT analysis, and then you need to do a recommendation. So that's recommending, that's once you put the model together, that is recommending whether you should or shouldn't invest in this deal and why you're recommending whether you should or shouldn't invest in this deal. It's just where the rationale bit comes in. So now let's go through this property section to pull out the key bits of information. Again, this description is actually more detailed in terms of what they're asking for compared to other modelling tests. Some of them will be a lot less detail, like this has a lot of dates in it, which is very helpful for you, but some of them won't have this level of detail. So you just need to make sure you're pulling out these key bits. So we're having an acquisition in March 2026. We've got a disposal in January 2031. So again, this is reiterating the fact that we want it to be a monthly model because we want to be able to sell that in January as opposed to in Q, whatever. We need to show income within our model. So we need to have the existing income coming in. We're then going to have a refurbishment. So we need to have our positive income, our negative refurbishment. We're then going to relet it after the refurbishment at a new rent that has rental growth shown in it. So, Again, some modelling tests will not ask you to do rental growth and some will. If you're not asked to do rental growth, then don't add it in unless you have time at the end. If you are, make sure you add it in. It's then telling you how to calculate the sale price at the end, so using a yield capitalization method. You then have your financing assumptions. So in this one, we've got a 2-year acquisition and development facility, which means that we're going to want to create a facility that's going to draw down against the acquisition and against the CapEx costs. And then we need to refinance it to an investment loan. So you've got 2 layers of debt in there. We then need to calculate our KPIs, our key performance indicators, on an unlevered and levered basis. And then the most important bit of this in the description is that you're targeting a 15% levered IRR. So what that means is that when you first put in, what I would always recommend that you do when you're building one of these models is that you use all of the base assumptions that are in the brochure and in this description, first of all, to get it set up. If you do that and you've got a 40% IRR based on the purchase price that's in the brochure, you've probably modeled it wrong. Because this assessor is not asking you to reduce the purchase price by 50 million. They're asking you to reduce the purchase price by several hundred thousand, maybe 1 million, depending on the size of the asset. So this is one of those key points that you need to make a note of. so that when you are doing that audit part of the modeling later, that you know that it works because it makes sense. This is, sometimes they won't put in specifically the target is 15%. Sometimes they'll just say you've got your client is value add or a core investor, in which case you need to sort of know the range that they'll be looking for. But in the majority of cases, they will be giving you a specific IRR target to go for, which means, as I say, if your original model before you adjust your purchase price or before you make any adjustments to the assumptions is massively off of 15% IRR, then you've modeled something wrong. I was once marking a modeling test where they did submit for a test that was supposed to have a 15% IRR. They submitted it with a 40% IRR and didn't think anything was wrong. And the reason why they'd submitted a 40% is because they had added interest, so that the investor was having income from their rental property as well as income from the bank in the form of interest, rather than paying interest to the bank. And it was such a teeny tiny error that would have been fixed by just changing a minus sign, but they just didn't take a moment to stop and think whether that 40% IRR made sense. So that's, yeah, one of the key bits that you need to look out for when you're reading, sitting on these modeling tests. Go through that, go through all first 10 minutes, just highlighting, like I've done here, each of the bits that you need to incorporate, and then start building it. Make sure that you're planning out your time as effectively as possible. So you know, okay, I need to build out the existing rent, I need to build out the refurbishment, I need to build out the future rent, I need to add in the rental growth, etc. And make sure you're setting yourself a bit of a time limit for each of those things. Because at the end of the day, submitting a half-finished model that doesn't work is a bit pointless because you then can't answer the rest of the questions. It would be better for you to build a model where you didn't have time, ignore where you couldn't do the rental growth, for example, because you ran out of time, but you managed to get to an answer, rather than doing the rental growth and then finding that you don't manage to finish the other bits. So that's why, yeah, at the beginning, 5 minutes, 5-10 minutes, just highlighting all these things. Make a plan for how long you're going to spend on each element, including setting aside the time at the end for doing the audit, having a bit of a review, thinking about what sort of questions they will be thinking of, and then also obviously to make sure you've got the time to do the paper or the investment memo that they have potentially asked you to do. I'm now going to open up for questions, because I know lots of you potentially have seen some modeling tests or not seen some modeling tests and have specific questions about some of those. Feel free to pop them in the Q&A or in the main chat, or come off mute if you want to talk, and we'll go through some of those. I've got then a little bit more to talk about after this Q&A session, but I wanted to make sure I gave you guys lots of time for asking questions, if you have any. Has anyone so far sat any modeling tests? Be interested to know. Charlie, what's the range of these tests in terms of length of time given? It really does depend on what you're asked to do in the modeling test. So some of them, they'll generally be at least an hour, going up to 4 hours. So if they're just an hour, they're likely to be just building a model, perhaps something fairly simple, i.e. something without debt or a development appraisal. If it's 4 hours, then they're likely to want you to be building something like this that has debt and that has a report at an investment memo sort of style of thing to do with it. And sometimes, if they're really cruel, they will also ask you to model a promote, which I think is just terribly mean. I've got a question in the Q&A that I'll just go to first. Henry says, is it common to see a test requiring a rent review? Yeah, so lots of the time, these modeling tests are going to be based on what that company does. So if a company is really into buying assets that have rent reviews or putting in place rent reviews, then yes, there will be ones with rent reviews. I think normally they're not going to ask you to model something that's got 100 tenants with rent reviews. It'll be that it has a single tenant with a rent review, or it has 3 tenants where one of them has a rent review. But it's definitely something that will be included in there. Going back to that chat bit, Ash, I'm assuming that's your first name. Are you able to do market research during the test? So yes, one of the things, depending on where you're doing your test, sometimes they will give you a bit of information. And I think actually this answers the next questions when it comes to data sources. Sometimes they will give you the information. They might give you a list of comparables that have the yields and the sort of local rents in the area, or they'll just specifically give you a rent and say it's £15 a square foot. Other times they will ask you to do the research. The difficulty with the research is that a lot of the useful information of actual leases that have been signed and actual deals that have been signed tends to be in like paid databases, so you might not have access to that unless they've given that to you as part of the test. Otherwise, you can look out on things like Rightmove. They have a commercial section, and it will give you, like, it obviously is not the agreed lease values, but it will give you the asking price for the lease, as it were, the sort of, the asking rent. And so that would be one place to source data. The other ones that are behind sort of locked tools are things like, I think it's called EGI Radius, or the Green Street. Is it called Green Street now? They've changed their name. I can't remember whether they've turned to Green Street or are now Green Street. But that Green Street database. So as I say, lots of it does tend to be behind locked paywalls. So if that's the case, then they will probably give you a bit of a comp schedule for you to go through. The other places, obviously, you could go and ask tools like ChatGPT to come up with some data sources, but you then need to make sure that you are specifying that you've got that from ChatGPT in terms of referencing where you've got all that information from. Same with any of the other things that you are looking up, and that you're putting into your modeling test as assumptions. Make sure that you are providing details about where they come from. If you were working and you were submitting an investment memo that had real comp data in it, comparable data in it, then you would be specifying that this has come from your agent who has done all the research into it. Hopefully that sort of answers that question for both of Ash and Norbert. Chan asks, do you have any advice on systematic way of practicing modeling? Sometimes I try practice question and fail to know how well I do. Yes, AI is not so good at being able to look at Excel spreadsheets, unfortunately. So as part of the EIP Academy, there is a course on how to pass modeling tests where I teach you to build a model in 90 minutes. And with that, you can then get a modeling test assessed by me, if that's something that you want to do. Because I think unless you basically you need to get someone else to check it for you, or come back to it a couple of weeks later when your mind is fresh to test it again. And again, on that practicing to go through an investment memo and presenting it logically, that it just takes practice, and it takes practice in terms of sitting in front of people like myself or any of your friends and family if they're willing to listen to you and present it to them. You've got to remember it's slightly difficult because obviously the person who's normally marking your modelling test knows exactly what they're looking for and looking at. But you need to act as if they don't, and that this is the first time they're ever seeing this deal. So if you were to practice presenting it to a family member or a friend, then they will be able to indicate where you're missing bits of information, because they will ask you questions about things that they don't understand. So that's one sort of tip for doing that. Alexi asks, do you need to submit a presentation in PDF with the clearly articulated text? If yes, how much should you spend on it? It depends on the modelling test. Sometimes they will not ask you to do a presentation at all. Sometimes they will ask you to submit it in advance. Sometimes they'll ask you just to stand up and present it with on a screen. So it depends on what is being asked in the modelling test. It then depends on how much time you're given for your modelling test. Writing these investment memos always takes a little bit longer time than you think. So I wouldn't leave just 10 minutes at the end to rush through it and type it all out. I would probably leave a third of the time to do it, to make sure that it's good, because also then you can, if you finish it quickly, you can still come back and do more nuances to your model. So that's why, as I say, it's really important that you plan out your time as well as you can and scrap the things that are sort of nice to have rather than must haves in order to get your model to function properly. And then you can always add them back in if you do something else faster later on in the test. Again, in the EIP Academy, in that modelling test course, there is a lesson about the presentation element of it in terms of what I would recommend that you include in your presentation. And then again, as part of the assessment element of that, you can practice losing my words, you can practice presenting it to me for feedback. Got another little question in the Q&A bit. Are they also judging on the way Excel is used, for example, just using the keyboard to navigate around the model? I don't think so, because a lot of them, I mean, there might be one very, very niche company out there who does that, but sometimes they will be monitoring your screen while you're doing a modelling test to make sure that you're not cheating. Sometimes they will just leave you in a room with a laptop and you just get on with it. So they're not going to be able to judge whether you're using keyboard shortcuts or not to navigate around it. I think that for your own benefit of using Excel, knowing some shortcuts is really, really helpful. Like, I definitely don't spend my time using the keyboard only to navigate around, because I quite like to use my mouse for things. But there's definitely shortcuts in terms of highlighting whole rows and shifting to the ends of data that just make modeling faster. So I would recommend learning those kind of ones, but you don't necessarily need to learn how to open up, how to open up random menus by using shortcuts. If you do join the EOP Academy, there is a shortcut download in there, and also I talk about the shortcuts that I'm using as I'm building the models for the training. So you can learn some of those doing that, but I wouldn't worry about them tracking your keyboard movements for Excel, because in reality it's not about, these modeling tests, that they are about Excel, but they're also about your ability, as I say, to follow instructions and to think commercially and to look at the bigger picture. So it would be a very niche company that you were applying to work for if they were assessing you on your ability to navigate using keyboard shortcuts. And it would be very short-sighted of them, I think, to use that as one of their assessing sort of points. Chan, is it in person or online mostly? That really, really depends on the company. Sometimes they will want you to come in so they can make sure you're not cheating, and so that they can meet you at the same time and sort of get you to use their laptop so that you're not cheating. Other times they will just say, you've got 48 hours, do it when you can in the next 48 hours. It depends on the company, and it depends on their sort of setup as to whether that's, which option that's going to be. Hopefully that answers that question. And if anyone else has any more questions, please do pop that in. Then, sorry, please do pop them in the chat. That has just reminded me that another thing that is really important on that bit around the cheating, because that's mostly why they will be doing it in person with their own laptop, is so they can make sure you're not cheating. There is no point in cheating. If you cheat on your modeling test, and then you get a job, you will be found out fairly quickly that you can't do it. So you might as well not bother doing that, because you will end up doing a job that you can't do. You'll probably get fired. People will not be able to trust you because you cheated and lied at the very, very beginning of your employment with them. So it's just not worth it. So in terms of that cheating element, because one of the first things that I always check, and this hopefully starts to answer Charlie's question as well that's just popped up. One of the first things I check is, when was this Excel document created and who was it created by? Because if it was created by someone else 15 years ago, then I'm going to assume that you have used a pre-existing file to build your model from. So even though you may have done some of the modeling yourself, I can guarantee that you haven't, I can't guarantee that you haven't built it fully from scratch yourself. Similarly, if I see things in a modeling test that I didn't ask you, and this is where following the instructions is really important, if I see things within your model that I didn't ask you to add, then I'm going to wonder why you've done that. If you haven't explained yourself, if you explain why you've added it, that's fine. But if, for example, I haven't asked you to add rental growth, but you do add rental growth, then I'm going to assume that you're using a pre-existing model, because there's something in there that I didn't bother asking you for. So Chan, yeah, so I shouldn't use a template and change inputs. No. Always, unless they say you can use a template, which I doubt that they would do, always start from scratch. It's just way, way better to start from scratch. Sometimes if the modeling test is very, very complicated, then they might say to you, and you're more advanced, and so they know that you have perhaps created templates yourself over the years, then you could say, like, for example, if I was sitting a modeling test now and they asked me to model a promote, I would say, I don't want to model a promote off my, off the, just from memory. I'd rather use this template that I've created and used many, many, many times over the years. So I might build the other elements of the model from scratch, but then I would just, plug and play that waterfall template into the model and make that point that, like, I've already got this perfectly functioning thing. I've modeled it a million times already. I've modeled it as part of the training course. I don't need to model it from memory. And hopefully they'd be happy with it. Charlie, on terms of your question about some modeling, some mistakes, I have got a slide on that I will cover in a second. And then Alexi, how to create this urgent focus for 48 hours if a worker may ask to shift the test to the weekend. Yes, and that's quite often why they will say, well, they will probably ask you, like, do you have time to do it in the next 48 hours? And you might say, oh no, sorry, I'm working on a whatever, and I'm going to theatre, so I don't have time, but I can do it on Friday. in which case of course they will let you do that, unless they've got a really urgent deadline where they need to employ someone by Friday. Then they should allow you to do it within the sort of next 2 to 7 days. Obviously, if you say, could I do it in October, they'll probably say no. But yeah, they should be flexible. All you can do is ask. So that's what I would say. Okay, hopefully we are now through with most of the questions. But again, if you have got, I'll carry on with the slides. But if you have more questions as I'm going through these bits, then please add them in. So mistakes. I have obviously said this quite a few times, but big mistake, not reading or fully following the instructions. It just takes 5 minutes at the beginning to go through and just highlight all the things you need to do, and will really save you time, particularly if you know what questions are going to be coming up later, so that you can plan for how you're going to add them into the model from the beginning. And also it'll enable you to build something quicker, because you've already planned for how you're going to bring them in. Also, when in terms of that following the instructions thing, make sure that you're understanding how long the test is going to take, and that whether you have any written elements or just number submission elements towards the end. Reusing old models or templates, obviously we talked about this. Unless you have the experience of building models and you can prove that you have built them yourself in the past, then if you're a university grad trying to use a model claiming that it's something that you built when you were 3, they're not going to believe you. So it's just easier to start from the beginning. Don't hard code things. So Charlie, one of the mistakes that I saw and actually all of these mistakes have come from people that I've seen. So the first one, people just not answering the questions fully and adding in random things that I didn't ask them to do, or not adding in things I've asked them to do. People using templates or old models that have other people's names in them, or other companies' branding in them. Hard coding things. One of the things that, even if it doesn't say it in the modeling test specifically, this one that I just showed you as an example does say it specifically, but some of them will not specifically say make it flexible, but there will be a question later on that says, now change the date, or change the rent, or change this, or run sensitivity. So if you haven't built it flexibly, you're just going to have to spend loads of time rewriting all the hard codes that you've already written. I genuinely had a test submitted where someone had typed in the rent for each period that the model was working for, and did that for all of the numbers. So I was like, well, this doesn't prove anything other than you can type in a cell. So no point in doing that. Also wasting time on formatting and unnecessary features. So in the EIP Academy, in this modeling test course that I've put in there, I show you some specific models that I have marked recently, or not recently, but over the years, where people have made these exact mistakes. And one of them, I opened it up and I thought, wow, this is really amazing, because they were applying for a job with one of my clients, and they'd branded this model so beautifully with the branding of the client. And I was like, that is amazing. Looks great. Really, points for effort. But then as soon as I started trying to mark the modeling test and look at how the model worked, it was all just complete crap. So they'd spent wasted loads of time on formatting and not actually bothered building the model properly. So again, no point in doing that. However, it is really important that you do use formatting where necessary, make it consistent and make it clear. So to answer this question that's just popped up then on the formatting, different companies use different formatting methods. I think some of the big ones that I think are really important. So investment banking is the one that uses what I've just shown you earlier in the presentation with the yellow background and the blue text. So more and more real estate firms are now using that, just because it makes it really clear what are inputs. Some companies and some people like to make the formulas, so not the hard codes, they like to make the hard codes white cells with black text, so just a normal cell, and they like to make the formulas coloured. But that doesn't really make any sense to me, because when you get to your cash flow, you don't want your cash flow to be multiple, really colourful. You don't want your outputs to be really, really colourful. So it makes more sense just to colour in your inputs. So what I tend to use is, yellow background with blue text for inputs. And actually I have a shortcut macro for this that I've built. So again, if you're in the EIP Academy, you can, Charlie, thank you very much for joining. In the EIP Academy, you can download this shortcut macro that enables you to write those shortcuts. I tend to do anything that's linked to a sensitivity. I will put a pink background on it to make it really, really clear that it's something that's being sensitized. The other bits of formatting that I think are really important are things like numbers should all be rounded to either 0 decimal points in terms of the visible, like what's visible, or 2 decimal points. For property, because they're such big assets, they're such big amounts of money, putting them just to the nearest pound in terms of what you're showing in your cell is much better than putting in the decimal places. Commas between thousands, I wouldn't really bother putting in pound signs, because almost every single cell in your cash flow is going to be a pound. So it'd be better for you to put in a percentage sign for things that are percentages rather than pound signs for things that are pounds. And the other key one is formatting your dates. So it's formatting your numbers clearly, formatting your inputs clearly, and then formatting your dates clearly. So I like to format my dates as showing the month in terms of the word. So like Jan 26, Feb 26, etc. Because it makes it really, really clear and easy to see. People aren't having to like work out what month number it is. So those are the sort of main ones that I would suggest that you do, because it just makes it so much easier to read. Then different firms will have different nuances about how they like things formatted, but as long as you're being consistent with your dates, your numbers, and making those inputs really, really clear, then that's sort of a great starting point for a modeling test. And then the final mistake is that failing to sense check your outputs and returns. As I said, when you're looking at that description in the modeling test about what they're asking you for, if they are asking you, if they are saying that our target is a 15% return, 15% IRR, then if your model is showing something wildly different from a 15% IRR, you've probably done something wrong. So always make sure you're doing a quick sense check that it all makes sense before you submit it. And similarly, what I would do in a modeling test example, or if I'm building something much bigger in the future, is make sure I follow one tenant line from beginning to end, just to make sure that it's all working properly, so that I know that that lease is expiring on the date that it's supposed to be expiring, and the new lease is starting on the date that it's supposed to be starting, etc. Obviously, you want to make sure that when you're adding in your time at the beginning of the session, that you're putting in that you've got, 5 minutes to sense check, but also 5 minutes just to make any amends that you need to make following that sense check. So hopefully that all makes sense. Now that we've got to the end of that section, I'd be quite interested to see how people are feeling now about financial modelling tests. Let me just find the poll bit again, so that you can put in a couple of words about how you're feeling. I'm sure you're all still feeling a bit nervous and unsure, but hopefully feeling a bit more confident after going through this in detail. Here are a couple of ideas if you fancy putting some of those in. and then I will get on to talking about a couple of other final things. Oh, good. Nice. We had someone saying confident. That's good. Right. So next couple of slides. So I just want to talk to you about what sort of the lack of support is potentially costing you, because I want to talk to you a little bit about the EIP Academy and also about this other offer that we have that I'm working with a friend of mine on. You can see a couple of testimonials here from people who I've worked with on helping them get through their modelling tests and practicing their interviews. And then my friend Sarah, she helps people with CV writing and interview support as well. So she's a real great one to who'll be supporting you guys with the academy going forward if you want to join. So awesome modelling skills plus a structured job search process, which is what Sarah brings to the table, obviously is going to help you get your jobs and move up in your careers. So obviously the EIP Academy is where you're going to get those awesome modelling skills, which I'll talk about a little bit more in a second and answer any questions on. And then the 45-day sprint is what Sarah has put together. And again, I will show you a little bit of information about that in a second. So what the EIP Academy is an online portal with instant access to all of the EIP Academy courses. You can join live Get Unstuck calls with me. We have monthly networking calls. We have community portal for asking questions, real world case studies, automatic access to any new courses and lessons, etc. that are added to the portal. Exclusive discounts, of which I'm going to talk to you about with Sarah's offer, and then flexible subscriptions so you can cancel anytime, whether it's after 1 month or 15 years, whatever works for you. So all of the stuff that's in there is valued at over £1,500. I'm sure you will have seen that that there are other training courses out there that charge you £1,000 for a day. And then you forget about it as soon as you've left the room. This is £89 per month. So you can join for 1 month, get access to all of that stuff, crack through it as fast as you can, and then leave, or you can stay on. And actually, I've got people who have been in there it only started last May. People have been in there for that entire time because they like dipping and diving into it when they need to. So you can see a couple of examples of the courses here in this screen. And if you look on the website, you'll be able to see all the courses that are available, but they're basically all broken down into little 2 to 10-minute videos where you build models alongside me. So you get a template, an Excel template, and you basically fill in the blanks with me and build a model. And that includes the how to pass a modelling test course, where I teach you to build a model in 90 minutes that you can then use those skills for actually passing modelling tests. And then the sprint is, again, it's an online course with Sarah Breyer. You get access to her Sprint GPT, which will help you write your CVs and applications. You get weekly live support calls and ready-made templates, scripts, and tools. And here's just a very quick message from Sarah.
If you're building skills in modelling and analysis, you are building some great skills, but that alone just is not going to get you hired. I've worked in recruitment for years, and the reality is it's not always the most qualified person that gets the job. It's the person who positions themselves the best. Most people I see aren't getting interviews, or they're not converting them. And this is what the 45-day sprint fixes. It gives you a really clear process to get your CV seen, get your LinkedIn up to date, and get really good networking practices and know exactly what to say in interviews. So instead of guessing, you're actually starting to get results.
So that was just a little message from Sarah. That's normally $299, but for EIP Academy members, you can get it 50% off. So once you join, you can get 50% off by following the link that is in the homepage there. I'm only opening up 15 places to the EIP Academy, so it is limited. The reason why it is limited is several-fold, but one of them, that sort of the main reason, is that I want to only be able to have as many students as I can actually support in there. So I'm only going to open up 15 places at this point in time. Otherwise, the doors are going to be closed once those 15 places fill up, or on the 30th of April, which is when the doors will close again. If you want to pay in full, so that's $899, which is a year's worth of access, so 12 months access, then you get a free modelling test and review and one-to-one session with me, which is normally an extra £197 to join that. And existing students can upgrade to annual to claim this. You just need to email hello@excelandproperty.com and we'll change your subscription to an annual subscription if you're already on the monthly one. Both of these offers, in terms of the pay in full bonus, the 15 places, and Sarah's 45-day sprint, all expire on the 30th of April 2026. So there's only 2 weeks to claim these. And this is the link to join if anyone wants to. And if you have any questions about the EIP Academy, about whether it's right for you, or what's included in there, then please pop them in the chat and I'll be more than happy to answer them. And I hope you found today's session useful. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining me. I feel like I can barely talk anymore after so much talking. So thank you very much, everyone, for asking questions and for joining me.